Hi everybody, it's Andrew Hutchings with you here today. Still not a doctor, still may be a medical doctor someday. And the topic of today is, where were steroids first made? Now, maybe that's something you just never thought about. Or maybe you always went by what you read online that they were first made in the 60s or the 50s. I think the typical assumption is that they were first made in the 50s, came into use late 50s, early 60s. But the interesting thing is that testosterone was first synthesized in 1935 in Germany. Now, if you know anything about Germany in that time period, they were very technologically advanced, in particular with chemistry, and they had big desires to develop new drugs. The big chemical company IG Farben was in charge of many subsidiaries. They were developing lots of good things. It's basically the beginning of modern medicine. Maybe you could argue that there's other things before it, but little trickles of things happened before then, and then Nazi Germany was the explosion of modern medicine. And we know that they developed, well, amphetamines were developed earlier, but we know that they used amphetamines and other drugs for their soldiers, and we know that in the concentration camps they tested a lot of different drugs on concentration camp, whatever you would call them, prisoners. And IG Farben, for example, was in charge of Bayer. Well, Bayer denies this because they say Bayer didn't exist then. But basically, Bayer got to use Auschwitz as their pharmaceutical experimentation camp. And they tested a lot of things. I'm not saying steroids were developed by Bayer in Auschwitz. Well, they weren't developed in Auschwitz, but I'm not saying that Bayer developed steroids and tested them in Auschwitz, although I'm not saying they didn't. But what I am trying to figure out, but it's hard, and I think it might be interesting for you to know, is that most of the evidence points towards our modern steroids having first been developed in Nazi Germany. There are numerous accounts of concentration camp people having said that they were injected with various things. Some made them grow breasts, some caused their testicles to stop working, all sorts of things that point towards steroids. And we already know that Germany synthesized testosterone in 1935. And given how chemically inclined they were to develop new drugs, why on earth wouldn't they have developed steroids? In 1935, things were going good for Germany. They weren't at a lack of resources, no one was closing in on them, and it really doesn't take a whole lot to modify testosterone. I should know, I'm a chemist myself. So if you developed testosterone in 1935, it's completely absurd to think that it would take until 1950 something to chemically modify it even just a little bit and make steroids. So if I had to bet, and I can't say for sure because it's very hard to find evidence of this because pharmaceutical companies don't want to be linked back to Nazi Germany, but if I had to bet like $1 million, I don't like to bet, I don't believe in betting, but if I had to bet $1 million or my life, and the options were Nazis first synthesized steroids, Nazis were not the first people to synthesize steroids and they were made later on. I would definitely bet that Nazis were the first ones to synthesize them, because everything points towards it. Now, the problem is that documentation, pharmaceutical companies don't want to say, oh yes, during the Nazi years, we developed all these drugs, we tested them on the concentration camp prisoners, and all sorts of things, and we got all this good information and it allowed us to develop even better drugs. No, they don't want to say that because it wouldn't go over so well. So yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to say. When you try to find out when steroids were first synthesized, it gets very murky. Like, you can find first times they're referenced in medical literature, but that means that they were already synthesized if they were referenced. So if they're referenced in the 50s, it means that they were synthesized before then. And even if stuff claims that they were synthesized in the 50s, like I said, no pharmaceutical company wants to admit that they developed drugs in the Nazi time period and most likely tested them on concentration camp prisoners. Would you? Probably not. It's not good for business. It's not good for a lot of things. But yeah, common sense says that if you synthesize testosterone in 1935 in Germany, and you're the top guys in the world for chemistry, and you're incredibly chemically inclined to develop new drugs, that you're not going to synthesize testosterone and just go, oh, hey, yeah, we synthesize testosterone. Cool, let's forget about it. Let's not try to modify it like we do with everything else. Let's not try to make it better. We do that with everything else we make, and we try to make as many possible modifications as possible. But with testosterone, let's just forget about that. And maybe scientists in a couple of decades will decide that there's some reason to modify it. Does that sound likely to you? Or given that it's not that hard to modify drugs, and that Nazi Germany was the most chemically advanced nation on earth and the most chemically inclined, that they would modify it? I mean, personally, I think that testosterone is synthesized and immediately they're modifying it. That's what I would do. Well, I mean, you already know how testosterone works. Maybe you synthesize it, you do a few more tests on it, then you start modifying it. But there's no reason why testosterone should be synthesized, and it takes decades, or even just 10, 15 years, 20 years. There's no reason why there should be that much time in between those two events. It should be more like a matter of days, weeks, maybe months. It just doesn't make sense for it to have taken any longer. So I hope you liked this video. I hope you found it interesting. Maybe you had known about this before, maybe not. Look into it more yourself. I look into it from time to time, but I don't look into it too deeply because personally, I fully believe that they were the first to synthesize steroids, and I think that all the evidence points towards it. So even if a pharmaceutical company claims that they developed a steroid in 1959 or something, I think there's a very good chance that it was actually developed during the time of Nazi Germany, and that they suppressed that information and claimed that they developed it after the war. I'm not saying all steroids were developed in Nazi Germany. That's certainly most likely not the case. Perhaps it is the case for most of them. Perhaps it is the case for half of them. I can't say how many were synthesized in Nazi Germany. Hey, there's even like a 0.01% chance that none of them were, lower than 0.01% chance. It's like the chance of lightning striking 10 times in the same place and an alien coming down to Earth and taking that lightning and teleporting it to a different planet. There is that chance that the Nazis did not synthesize steroids. So if you think that would be likely, then you also would think that it's likely that they didn't synthesize them. Who knows how many they synthesized, and we for sure know that some new ones have been synthesized since then, because there's countless modifications, but you do get to a point where you can't keep modifying something because you can only make so many modifications to a molecule before it just does not resemble its original molecule and it just does not have the same functions. Please like and subscribe and check out my other videos, comment because it helps the algorithm. Check out my Instagram, natural_true_fitness. You can hire me for coaching, for diet advice, supplement advice, nutrition advice, whatever kind of advice you want. Really, please like and subscribe. I'm going to try to pay my way through medical school by being a fitness person. My arm looks small there from the lighting, because I've always been into this stuff, and I'm into chemistry and biology and the human body. So it's just like a natural interest of mine. Well, yeah, it's been my interests probably since I was the chemistry and pharmacology of the human body as related to fitness, not until I was about 16 and a half, 17, but chemistry, pharmacology, and the human body since I was 14. And I've been into bodybuilding and strength training since I was about 10. So like and subscribe, check out my Instagram.